this. So, imagine, we're going to first look from the perspective of the Han, right? Remember, Han are the majority of Chinese people. 95% of people in China are Han. I think, Tianyu, just to check, you're Han Chinese?
It's fine time.
I mean, you're Chinese, you're the Han Chinese?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay, yeah, of course, because it's 95% of the people are Han. But there's also minorities. But if you're the Han Chinese, we'll talk more about later. If you're Han Chinese in the new Qing dynasty, you have to decide what to do. The emperor, remember, committed suicide. Rebels had taken over the capital. And you have this new powerful group who's come in. Remember, there was a guy named Wu Sangui, a Chinese general who let them in. And you got to figure out what you're going to do. One thing you do is just say, these guys are the new powerful guys. They're the ones in charge, so I'm going to work with them. You can just actively serve the new dynasty. These guys are in charge. They're powerful. I don't want them to kill me. I'm going to work with them. You may say, I don't really like these guys, but I don't have a choice. I'm just going to follow the law. I'm just going to passively accept their rule. Right? I'm not going to try and kiss up to them. I'm not going to try and make them like me. But I also don't want them to kill me. I know the Ming have been defeated. There's not much we can do. I'm just going to passively accept. I'm going to follow the law. I'm going to do what they tell me to do. But that's it. Right? I'm not going to make any sacrifices to these guys. I don't really like them. But if they got power, that's all I can deal with. Another option is to passively resist. This is where you appear to accept them, but in secret, you resist them. So one thing that some scholars did, for example, some Han Chinese scholars, they would write books criticizing the Manchu, say, oh, these guys are a bunch of barbarians. And then they would share them secretly, or they would just hide them. That's passive resistance. Right? We're going to spread ideas that we don't like these guys. And if they ever become weak, these ideas could justify rebellion. But these guys are too strong. I don't want to try it right now. So I could work with them actively, I could work with them passively, I could passively resist, or I could actively resist and lead a rebellion. And while the Ming Emperor is dead, wow, remember the Emperor has lots and lots of concubines and wives, so the Emperor has lots and lots of descendants. So there are lots of Ming princes who could theoretically restore the Ming Empire. So there are going to be Chinese people, Han Chinese people, who do not like the Manchus at all, and are going to actively resist and launch rebellions. There are a lot of them. Right? There are a lot of them. So that's the Han Chinese perspective. How do we make sense of these guys? How do we deal with them? And I can say that's your 4 options. The Manchu are trying to do the opposite. How do we maintain this conquest? Remember the Mongols. They conquered China. They ruled it for less than 100 years. Right? They were able to conquer China, but they couldn't figure out how to maintain it. So the Manchu had to figure out, how are we going to maintain our conquest? So the first problem they have to deal with, we talked about before, is Ming loyalism. How convince the Chinese people that the barbarians, the Manchu, were the rightful rulers? How do you convince Chinese people that these barbarians have the mandate of heaven? That's the first problem that the Qing have to deal with. And they do this in various ways. Now, you don't have to remember the guy's name, but I do want you to remember the edict. Dorgan was like a regent for after Hong Taiji died, Dorgan kind of is in charge for a young Manchu emperor. But he writes, you southern subjects, meaning the Chinese, did not dispatch a single soldier or a single arrow when the last Ming emperor faced a calamity, and when the palace gates and the doors of the imperial tombs were burst open. So when the rebels, threatened the emperor and then were broke into the palace and broke into the tombs and looted it. You didn't do anything. You did not confront the roving bandits. He means the rebels, but he's insulting them by calling them bandits. But rather hid yourselves like tigers in a cave as the state was about to be ruined. So you Chinese didn't do anything to help the empire. You Chinese just sat there and let the rebels take the capital and force the emperor to commit suicide. You Chinese didn't do anything. So heaven, right? Therefore I have respectfully received heaven's mandate and have set in order the army to punish your crimes. You failed to protect your emperor. So heaven has chosen a new emperor, a new dynasty. That's us. We're going to come in and punish the people who did this, and we're going to punish you for not helping. Another thing they did, this is very important, is one thing we have to stress. Okay, you know what's really interesting, I think, about Korea and China as opposed to Japan and how they deal with people who have died, right? So, Daye, if you go through the countryside in Korea, what do you see everywhere on the mountains? The mudong. Right? Yeah. There's tombs everywhere in Korea. You go through the countryside, you see tombs everywhere. Korean people buried the dead. Chinese people also buried the dead. And oftentimes they would put them in multiple coffins. If you were rich, you had several coffins. And in the Good Earth that you read for this last weekend, I didn't have you read this part, but one thing they did for the father, they bought him a coffin while he was still alive, and they put it in his room. Because then he knew that he would be taken care of after he died. In Confucianism, your body comes from your parents. If you let anything happen to your body, that's bad. That means you don't respect your parents. You know how if your parents gave you an expensive toy and you broke it? It's like you don't respect your parents. Well, your parents gave you your body. So you need to take care of your body because it came from your parents. So for example, Chinese, even though Chinese, like they would execute people by cutting off their heads, they wouldn't tattoo usually, unless someone did something really bad. Tattooing was really bad because it disfigured your body that came from your parents. Yeah, Madison?
That's not why in the other reading when the mom, like, that was like second it so loud.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah, she was showing that he had, he was messing with it was kind of a warning that you're endangering your body. But this is really important. Koreans and Chinese do this as well. They're very strict about this. Japanese is more Buddhist than Confucian. So in Japan, what do you usually do with the bodies, Eiko? Cremate, yeah. So they cremate the bodies because it emphasizes Buddhism, which emphasizes change and transition, reincarnation, all that. But in Confucianism, you want to keep the body, it came from your parents. So what happened was Chinese men typically did not cut their hair. Your hair came from your parents. You have to preserve your body. So you didn't cut your hair. Men let it grow long and then put it up on top. Right? So it looked like they had short hair, but actually they had long hair. When the Qing took over, they insisted that Chinese men cut their hair in the Manchu style, which meant shaving the front part of their head. Right? The front part, like up to here, should be bald, but they can grow it in the back. But to Chinese people, that's really horrific. You don't cut your hair like this. You don't shave it, especially. Like that's a gift from your parents. But this is how they explain this. They said, this is the Qing emperors. They say the emperor is like the father and the people are like his sons. The father and sons are the same body. Remember, we try to emphasize there's this idea, you respect your parents, you respect the emperor. You can see that idea here. How can they be different from one another? If they are not as one, then it will be as if they had two hearts. And would they not be like the people of different countries? Right? I only rule the people of one country. All residents of the capital and its vicinity will fulfill the order and shave their heads within 10 days of this proclamation. If you live out further, you have more time. Those who follow this order belong to our country. Those who hesitate will be considered treasonous bandits. Now, so they want to, so what does this do then? Like, how does this help them rule, or at least to pacify the country? Yeah, you can tell what side someone's on, and it forces you to make a choice. Right? Remember, some Ming people want to passively resist. They want to hide. But this forces them, as Dai said, to make a choice. And we can clearly see what choice you made. And if you're familiar with the Taiping Rebellion that we'll talk about later in the 19th century, they were called the long-haired rebels because they let their hair grow out to show they were rebelling against the Qing. So hair is very important, the way we dress and so forth. So that tries to do, and we'll come back more to this first problem. How convince people, Chinese people, that barbarians were their rightful rulers, the mandate of heaven, all that. We'll come back to that. The other problem is how do you maintain the Manchu identity? If Manchus cease to exist as a group, then obviously their rule also ceases to exist. So the Manchu have to maintain their identity as Manchu. If they lose their identity, they will lose power. Right, so we're a different ethnic group from the Chinese. If we simply become Chinese, we'll lose power. We have to, if we want to maintain our families and power, our dynasty, we have to maintain our identity. They did this in a variety of ways. They lived separately. Every major Chinese city had a Manchu quarter. There was a place where the Manchus lived, and no Han Chinese were not allowed to live there. So Tianyu would not be allowed to live there. Right? You wouldn't be allowed to live there because you're Han, you're not Manchu. Of course, they lived in the best places. And they weren't allowed to marry each other. Or I'm sorry, they weren't allowed to marry outside their ethnic group. If you were Manchu, you had to marry a Manchu. So again, if you fell in love with a lovely Manchu girl, you couldn't marry her. It would be illegal. Because if we have intermarriage, we'll cease being a separate people. They also, one thing that allowed them to get the empire was they were such good soldiers. So they were expected to maintain their martial vigor. Right? If you were Manchu, you had to learn how to use a horse. You had to learn to fire on horseback. And also they were encouraged to keep hunting. Manchu emperors loved to hunt. They hunted all the time. You may notice, if you know medieval European history, medieval kings also hunted all the time. And the connection, of course, is learning how to hunt involves the same skills you need to fight in a war, right? Shooting people with arrows and shooting animals with arrows is not that much different. So it's a similar kind of thing. And they also sought to maintain their own religion, right? They were not traditionally Confucians. They were not traditionally Buddhists. They followed a kind of shamanism. And they also had their own writing system, right, to demarcate them. So this is an example of what traditional Manchu shamans would look like. If you're not familiar with shamanism, shamans typically believe that the gods can descend on them and speak through them, or that they can engage in rituals that let their spirits go up to the gods and communicate with the gods, and then they can use that to tell the fortune and to control supernatural forces and things like that. But this was different from how Chinese people did things. So they emphasized they had a different religion. They also had different writing, right? This is a bilingual book, and you can see there's the Chinese right there. There's the Manchu writing. They used a phonetic alphabet, so it's similar to English, right? They're letters. These are letters that stand for sounds. So they use their own alphabet. So in this way, they can try and maintain their own cultural identity, right? We're different from the Chinese that we rule. And they were also given special access to government offices. So, for example, each Chinese province had 2 governors. A Han Chinese Chinese governor and a Manchu governor. So Manchus were given special access to office. They often didn't have to pass the exams in order to become officials. So this allows them to maintain power. We have to maintain a separate identity. We don't want to get eaten up by the Chinese. We'll be just absorbed because there's very few Manchus, right? There's hundreds of millions of Chinese people. There's not that many Manchus. And just to give you an idea, you can see kind of the issue. So one thing that Manchu women were not allowed to do was to bind their feet. Remember how we talked about Chinese admired women with small feet? And so they would bind them to make them really small? Manchu women were forbidden from doing that. But that was still fashionable. So they wore shoes that would make it look like their feet were small. Right? So you can see there's this kind of pressure. This is what they're worried about. Right? There's this pressure on us because there's so many more Chinese people than us. There's this pressure to become like the Chinese. But if the Manchus cease to exist as Manchus, then they cease to have power. So there's a tension. The Manchus must balance being similar enough to Chinese, and by this I mean Han Chinese, to be accepted as rightful rulers, but different enough that they exist as a group. That's hard to do, right? They must be similar to the Chinese and not the same, different without being too different. That's hard to do. The Qing do that successfully and rule China for almost 3 centuries. Right? They're going to be very different from the Mongols. They do this successfully. But this is hard to do. But they do it. This is the slide where we started on Friday, right? We skipped forward and we got to this, right? So the key thing was, right, the Ming had clearly lost the mandate of heaven. Who had it now? The Manchu say, we have it. And I gave you as an example this guy, the Kangxi Emperor. We tried to talk about how he is going to try and argue why the Chinese have it. We saw that, we watched that video. Remember, it began with him performing traditional rituals. Remember the plowing. Right? You had this ritualistic plowing of the land. Shows he still cares about agriculture. He still cares about the rituals. He's going to maintain Chinese culture and civilization. Unlike the Mongols, who formed a failed dynasty, we're going to follow Chinese tradition as much as possible, and that will allow us to maintain. And remember, I gave you the other example of the Tang poetry. Right? He subsidized the publication of all these Tang poems. And that shows high culture, because I have to tell you, I took classical Chinese, which is Old Chinese, and our professor was a specialist in Tang Dynasty poetry, and for fun he gave us some poems to translate. Had no idea. Because what would happen is Chinese people memorized everything, so they would use 2 Chinese characters, and you were supposed to understand that was a reference from a book that was 500 years previously to the big long chapter in the book. You're supposed to know that from those 2 characters. So you had to be really smart to understand Tang Dynasty poetry. Kangxi Emperor understood it and wanted to share it, and that showed that he supported traditional Chinese culture, and so should be supported as emperor. Yes, Dylan?
How did they do that, but yet still have a separate identity? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, like I said, this is how they did it, by maintaining all this. So the Kangxi Emperor was good at Tang poetry. He was also a really good hunter, and he also learned Manchu really well, or he knew Manchu really well. So that's the problem. How do you balance that? How do we be Chinese, but not too Chinese? Hard to do, but they pulled it off. there's one more video clip that talks about him I want to play for you. And I think it also gives you a sense of how he's going to try and do this. And as you watch this clip, I want you to catch, right, what is he going to do in order to convince the Chinese that the Manchus have the mandate of heaven, that they have the right to rule.
This is the temple of Confucius in Shandong province. Many kings and emperors in feudal China made special trips here to pay homage to Confucius, but the emperors of the Qing dynasty made the ceremony of sacrifice to Confucius even more special. When Emperor Kangxi arrived at the shrine of Confucius and paid respect to the great master of Chinese culture, it was with the highest level ritual. He knelt down 3 times and kowtowed 9 times. He then wrote an inscription concerning Confucius which read, "Model of virtue and learning." He went even further by paying respect to the tomb of Confucius in the most solemn manner. The sincere respect Emperor Kangxi was showing for Confucius was meant to convince the scholars of the Han ethnic majority that he'd come to pay homage to Confucius not only as the new ruler of China, but also as a genuine disciple of Confucius. He was holding the grand ceremony to show that he had totally integrated himself with traditional Chinese culture. Confucian teachings had dominated mainstream ideology in China since the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago. From its founding, the Qing Empire advocated the principle of respecting Confucius and reading the Confucian classics. The Qing emperors made a special effort to convince the scholars and common people of the Han ethnic majority that the new regime was of the same political lineage as the Han Dynasty, and that the Qing Dynasty was a worshipper and inheritor of Confucian culture. It was sincerely doing its best to integrate itself with the profound and all-embracing culture of the Chinese nation.
儒家思想作为他的这个统治思想。这里头呢，首先他对这个儒家的这种传统的这种说教，包括这个仁义礼智信这些这种伦理纲常，包括君臣关系等等等等，以至于就是统治百姓的这些思想，从关外开始已经是用儒家思想。
On a day in early spring 10 years before the publication of the complete collection of Tang poems, the imperial court held a special examination in the palace. The subjects included poetry and prose writing and various topics covering civil administration. The titles of the essays covering civil administration were People in the Entire Nation Are One Family and On the Understanding of Farming, topics taken from the Confucian classics. The topic, People in the Whole Country Are One Family, implied a fusion of different ethnic groups within a single country, while the topic, Understanding Farming, strongly implied that scholars should know about agricultural production and help the government find ways to advance the national economy. This policy of placing stress on farming so that people could have ample food and clothing laid the material foundation for the unity of the country and the harmonious coexistence of different ethnic groups, thus bringing about social stability.
All right. So the clip begins with what? What does the emperor do?
Ceremonial, the grand ceremony.
Yeah, right. He's engaging this grand ceremony, kneeling down. Right. He's an emperor and he's kneeling down. Emperors don't usually do that. Right. And who's he kneeling down in front of? Confucius. Right. So he shows the utmost respect. And I think that's what they said. He got down. He knelt down, hit his head on the ground 3 times, and he did that 3 times. Right, so he knelt down 3 times, and each time he did that, he put his head on the ground 3 times. That's the highest respect you can show someone in Chinese ritual culture and etiquette. So he's showing, look, we respect Confucius. Confucius is awesome. We're going to keep following the Confucian way. And he inscribed a tablet, right, showing that. Right, so he's communicating to everyone, we're not going to change your civilization. We're going to keep following Confucianism. Right? And then he continues the exam system. You want a job? We'll give you jobs. You want to become a government official? Great, take the exams. So he's going to continue that system. Remember, that system is based around Confucianism. So we're going to maintain Chinese civilization. Did anyone give me, what was one of the questions from the exam? Right, one was about farming. How can we improve farming?
One family.
Right, the people of the nation, all people of the nation are one family. So you're maybe Han, I'm Manchu, we're all people of the same country, we're all family. I'm the father, you're my children. You just need to work together. Right, so that's the exam. And the exam then, if you're studying for these kinds of questions, it makes you think a certain way. It makes you come to accept that. And remember, going way, way back at the beginning of this class, how do we know someone has the mandate of heaven? Do people have enough food to eat? Do they have clothes to wear? Do they have a place to live? Are they safe? Well, if we encourage agriculture, that ensures that people have food to eat and clothes to wear. So the idea is that if you bring about economic prosperity, people will accept you as ruler. That's how you know that you have the mandate of heaven. The Chinese in this time period were not nationalists. They did not believe that you necessarily had to be ruled by people of your same nationality. Heaven could choose someone else to rule you. In this case, it looks like the Qing, especially if they bring economic prosperity. So if you accept civilization, you're no longer a barbarian, that means you can have the mandate of heaven. Right? The Chinese did not think that much in terms of ethnicity. Right? They thought in terms of civilization. And just to give you an example, this is it's interesting. One country that China really respected was Korea. They called Korea a land of etiquette. Koreans are very proud of being called a land of etiquette. That's really high up there. But that's because Koreans had accepted Chinese civilization in terms of Confucianism. So Chinese did not see Koreans as barbarians because they accepted Chinese civilization. Manchus accept Chinese civilization, Confucianism, good to go. We're not barbarians. They have the mandate. They can have the mandate of heaven. Now, this is a quote from the Analects, the kind of one of the key Confucian books, and it says, "The master." By the way, anytime you see the master, it means Confucius. Right? The master is Confucius. Right? The master said, "Guide them," and he means the people, "with policies and align them with punishments, and the people will evade them and have no shame." Right? Meaning, if you just try and teach people with law and punishment, they won't internalize those ideas. Right? Law only works as long as the police officer can see you. We want people to internalize the ideas. Guide them, the people, with virtue, and align them with ritual, which can also mean etiquette. And the people will have a sense of shame and fulfill their roles. This is Confucian-style government. Right? Just punishing people just doesn't really work that well. We need to get them to behave properly through ritual, through acting politely, through giving them a sense of shame. They won't misbehave. That's kind of the idea. And this is a very Confucian idea. And so I want to stress, the Kangxi Emperor and the Manchus follow this. They're not just, when they say we're going to accept Confucianism, it's not just propaganda. It's true. And to give you an example, we included the 16 edicts. Right? So what I want to do first of all, Tianyu, do your best, please. Can you read the first 4 edicts slowly for me, please?
First one.
Loudly, too. Yeah.
敦孝弟以众人伦，都宗族以昭雍穆，和乡壤以息真颂，农桑以足衣食。
Excellent. Now, one thing, I just wanted him to do that so you can see the rhythm. Remember, these things they talked about in that video clip last time. Twice a month in every Chinese village, these were read out loud. Right, so twice a month for over 200 years, people got together and listened to these. And you can see it would be easy to remember them. Right, there was a certain rhythm you could hear in Tianyu's pronunciation. And notice, even if you don't read Chinese, you'll notice 1, 2, 3, E, 1, 2, 3. Right, this character. How's this pronounced in Chinese? Okay, E in Chinese. I do it the Korean way. I pronounce it E. But you can see there's a symmetry there. It's really lovely, actually. Right, you've got 3 characters, E, symmetry. Right, and Daye, I just want to show you also, remember this is a broad culture, so Daye can read this just fine. Can you read this for me, Daye? Right, so similar. The pronunciation is similar. When I took classical Chinese, it was really funny because the way you study classical Chinese is this. You translate it for your homework. They give you like a few pages of Confucius. You translate it, you come to class and everyone takes turns reading their translation, and the professor corrects it, but you have to pronounce it first. And I was there with several people who spoke Korean but not Chinese, and the professor was nice and let us read in Korean, even though he didn't understand Korean. But after a while, he started correcting us. He's like, I don't think you got that right. It doesn't sound Chinese enough. And he was usually correct. And Eiko, I'm sorry, can you do 4 for us in Japanese, how that would sound, or is that? Some of them maybe.
Each word I know meaning, but the way we read is different.
Different. Okay, yeah. Japan does its own thing.
Yes.
Always. Excellent. Right, Korea's close. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Ika.
I'm sorry, but number 4, the first one we said Jew.
Right.
Wait.
Right, yeah, in Korean it's chung, so very similar, right?
Yeah. And the next one, no.
Okay, excellent. Nong.
No. And the next one, I don't know.
That was a hard one. I had to look it up.
Kua.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah, song in Korean, I think.
E is the same. E.
Right.
And the next one, ashi means foot,
Right?
leg.
Okay.
And the next one is E means clothes.
Right?
And farmer, Jew, no. Next one is no.
Right? Yeah, it means farmer. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you can still understand the meaning, right? Even though we've got Chinese, Japanese, Korean, sometimes it means a little bit different because there's some differences, but for the most part, everyone can understand them. And just to explain the grammar, classical Chinese is interesting because it doesn't. I remember one Korean professor of classical Chinese explained to me, classical Chinese doesn't have grammar. You just write like Confucius wrote. Right? That's how it was explained. But this in Chinese, classical Chinese, you don't have to say whether something is a verb or a noun. You have to tell by context. You know how in English we have to conjugate verbs? Well, like north in English is always a noun, right? North. But in Chinese, you can north. Like you can say he northed. It means he went north. Right? It's fun. But this means heavy. But in this case, it means emphasize. So make heavy. What do you make heavy? Agriculture and sericulture, which is taking care of silk, raising silkworms. In order to. That's what E means. In order to. Sufficient. It can mean foot too, but the other meaning is sufficient. Sufficient food, sufficient clothing, food. So if you literally translate it, it's heavy agriculture, sericulture in order to sufficient clothes, food. I love Chinese. Classical Chinese is so much fun. It's so efficient because look at this when you put it into English, right? Stress agriculture and sericulture so that they may be sufficient for food and clothing. Right? Very elegant language, very easy to get these ideas in here so that you can keep track of them. There's always 3 characters, do something in order to have these results. And it all makes a lot of sense. Strengthen filial piety and brotherly affection to emphasize morality. Strengthen clan relations to illustrate harmony. Pacify relations between local groups to put it into quarrels and litigations. Prize frugality so as to make careful use of wealth. Promote education to improve the habits of scholars. Scholars, we misbehave a lot, so you have to make sure to do this, right? Stop us from behaving badly. Extirpate heresy to exalt orthodoxy. Don't believe bad religions. We'll come back to that later, right? Bad religions are dangerous. From a Chinese state perspective. Speak of the law to give warning to the stupid and stubborn. Remember, this is a paternal state. It tells you what to do. Can you imagine if the American government were ever to refer to its people as stupid and stubborn, right? That would cause some issues, I think. Right. Clarify rights and manners to improve customs. Let each work in his own occupation so the people's minds will be settled. Instruct young people to prevent them from doing wrong. Prevent false accusations to shield the law-abiding. Prohibit sheltering of runaways to avoid being implicated in their crime. Pay taxes to avoid being pressed for payment. Unite the 5-family surveillance system to eliminate theft and armed robbery, so keep an eye on each other. Right? Inform the government if one of your neighbors is behaving badly. Resolve hatred and quarrels to respect life. So the idea is simple. Maintain harmony, maintain stability, make sure everyone has enough food and other things. Very simple. But what would happen is, remember, ritual. We bring everyone together twice a month to recite these things. And usually they had a little party. They would drink wine and eat food and stuff like that. So that's why you would still come anyway. And it encourages people, it makes it clear how you're supposed to behave. And it's easy for Chinese people to remember this. And what I think is fascinating is this continues in China to this day. Right? I think the Chinese government, right? The Chinese government often has a slogan, right? Like a saying that all Chinese people should know that shows them the current government policy. And Chinese people are really good at this stuff. They're really good at coming up with clever slogans. We'll talk a lot when we get to communism. Communists are really good at coming up with slogans. So I do need to tell you before we continue to tell you with the next section or next part of this, I need to tell you a little bit about Kangxi because this guy was really a remarkable emperor, right? He manages to get this balance right. How can it be Chinese enough, but not too Chinese? He gets it right. But also, his father dies while he was still a kid. And what happens is, puts an emperor in a really bad position. He becomes emperor when he's like, I think 7 or 8 years old. He's quite young. That's not good. because it means that you have to have a regent. What's a regent? It's someone who helps a young emperor rule. The problem is regents often decide, hey, I would like to have power myself. Remember what happened with Yonghua? How he pushed his nephew out of power? That could happen to Kangxi. That's what Kangxi's afraid of. So one thing that's amazing is that Kangxi, when he gets to be the age of 15, he tells the regent to take a hike. He says, I'm going to rule myself now. I don't need you telling me what to do. And it works. He pulls it off. Right? This could have easily led to his assassination. This could have led to a civil war. Right? Similar to the conflict we saw surrounding Yonghua. But it doesn't. Right? He pulls it off. So he's able to, this helps the Manchu to stay in power, right? If there had been instability among the Manchu, conflict and civil war, the Chinese would have kicked them out, no problem. But here's the other thing that's very important. Remember that guy Usangui from the previous section? He's the guy that let the Manchus into China. Remember the rebels had overthrown the dynasty, the last emperor killed himself, and the Qing wanted to come down to China to punish them, but there was a Chinese army led by this guy Usangui, and he was in their way. And they said, please move. Help us to defeat the bandits, help us to defeat the rebels. And Usangui had to decide, do I stick with the rebels who I don't like, or these guys? And he decided to stick with the Qing. Well, he was rewarded for his service, as you might guess. He was given a large amount of territory. What was happening, though, was he was becoming an old man, and he wanted to give that territory to his kid. And there were several other people that the Manchus, who had helped the Manchus, and had been given territory, and they wanted to basically become hereditary kings. They wanted to take that land and give it to their children. That would have led to the division of China. Right? This would have led to the division of China. If Usangui would have been able to form his own dynasty ruling a part of China, China would have been divided. What happens, though, is Kangxi will pressure them to retire. He'll say, you guys need to, you've done your job, you're old, time to take a break, time to retire. And this led them, they knew what was going on, this led them to rebel, what we call the rebellion of the three feudatories. This rebellion takes a long time to deal with. But the thing is, and Kangxi is still a young man when this happens. He's only 19 when this starts. So think about this. This guy is standing up to officials like Usangui who are in their 60s, who are old, who are experienced, who are wise, and telling them, this is how we're going to do things. And he pulls it off. Right? From the age of 19 to the age of 28, he's going to be putting down this major rebellion. And by doing this, he ensures two things. The Manchus will stay in power, and China will stay united. The Manchus will stay in power, and China will stay united.
Also, nobody will mess with him.
Also, no one's going to mess with me, right? If you're an emperor, you don't want anyone to mess with you, right? You want people to be scared of you. So a few reminders. Like I said, I extend the quizzes, but a few people still forgot the quizzes. So do remember that the missed quizzes, you have up to 2 retakes if you miss a quiz. But you have to email me by the end of the day today for me to give you that. The review quiz, people generally did well. We'll have another review quiz coming up that will open on Friday and close on Sunday. The readings for reading quiz 3, these are a little bit easier. One is called Pictures to Draw Tears from Iron. And this is looking at a 19th century book produced by Chinese people meant to gain famine relief. They wanted to try and raise money to help poor people who were suffering from a famine. It's really interesting because they were using kind of advanced techniques to do this, and there's all these neat illustrations. And it shows you how China was kind of borrowing from the West while still maintaining old traditions, so it's kind of cool reading. But the book was then translated into English, and it shows in this international connection because you'll start having people in Britain giving money to starving Chinese people, which is kind of interesting there. And also I know a lot of people are art majors, and this goes into a lot of art kind of critique. And then we have the last of the Making of Modern China comic, that last bit. Both, remember, this should be open now. You should be able to take the reading quiz starting Wednesday. We don't do the other quiz until later because there'll be material I haven't covered yet. Both, remember, are due by 11:59 p.m. Sunday. Okay, so one thing, unfortunately, this class often ends up being very lecture-y, and I don't like that, but you kind of have to lecture to a certain degree because other than, Tianyu and Eiko and Dai, most of you probably don't know that much about China, right? Tianyu, you could teach the class, probably. But, we can't, it's harder to have discussions. But I do want to work some in when we can. And this is my assistant teacher. This is the guy who helps me to discuss. And some of you know, because you've met Psyduck before. This is my Psyduck I got when I was a graduate student. This is a Pokemon. I call him the graduate student Pokemon because he always has a headache and people think he's useless. Graduate school's hard. But okay, so he's going to assist me. So this is how it works. So I've got side duck, so I'm going to answer the first question. When was Pu Sungling engaged to be married? Right. I don't expect the exact people to remember the exact year, but remember he's the guy that was quoted in that chapter, The Feud, right? And he was about 10 when he was engaged to be married. He was getting on in years, so it was time for him to get engaged. And I like that he wrote, I was already 10, right? It's like he was getting old, right? So there's this idea you should marry young, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it side up to someone. Dylan, you've got side up now. So that I'm going to ask you to answer this next question. What was his life like? And what problems did his wife's personality cause? If you don't know the answer, you just give side up to someone else, right? Very simple.
She was very she was very affectionate.
She was very nice lady.
And she wasn't a big gossiper.
Right.
And the problems that her personality caused was simply, since her personality was so wonderful, her mother-in-law fell in love with her, and then the other sister-in-laws hated her for it, and family feud.
Excellent, right, exactly. Then you can throw it to the next person, and that's how it works. Yeah, give it to us. It's all right. So, and then hopefully, I like that, Dylan. Some people just hand it. No, throw side up, right? And you got to look at him, right? You can't hide. If you hit someone, I'll just tell people to throw it at you, right? If you get hit by him, you got to answer the question. Like I say, if you don't know the answer. I just want to point out, Tianyu, before you answer the question, the way women are treated in Chinese culture is very complex, and you can see this in the writing. So this means woman. This 1, 2, 3, that's woman. You notice there's woman, there's woman. This means roof. And so what's fun, what I think the Chinese word for family is a roof with a pig under it, which is really cool, I think. Because farmers would sleep with their animals. It keeps you warm. This is a roof with a woman under it. Tianyu, what does that mean? This one.
Yeah.
The meaning.
The meaning, safety.
Yeah, safety, peaceful, comfortable. This is a good character. This is a nice one. So this is a positive view of women in Chinese society. This is obviously two women. Daye, do you know the meaning of this? Or Eiko? What does this mean? There's two women.
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know this? I think this character's not used too much. It means to quarrel or to fight. So kind of patriarchal. I think that's why it's not used much anymore, right? But that goes to Dylan's answer, right? This poor woman, she was so nice, and being nice got her into trouble. Right? Being nice got her into trouble. So, okay. So, Tianyu, what was Sui Meng like?
What was?
Yeah, just this. What was Sui Meng like?
He is aggravative
Mm-hmm.
and will beat others if they are bad person.
Yeah, excellent. He's this very interesting kind of character. You see this a lot in Chinese traditional culture. He is a violent man, but one who he's violent for good reasons, because he is angry that people are being mistreated. So this person's he can't control himself. When someone's mistreated, he has such a deep sense of justice, he gets angry and he has to do something about it. Right? Tianyu, can you toss it to someone else, please? That's about his relationship.
Okay.
Oh, you don't want to throw it? Oh.
No,
All
I'll
right.
toss it. You wait.
Okay, thank you. So what was his relationship like with his mother? What did she not want him to do? How did she get him to do what she wanted?
Cool. So, he really respected his mom. And
Right.
She didn't like the fact that he was violent about a lot
Yeah.
of things, so he kind of kept it from her.
Right,
That's
yep.
a lot of foreshadowing. But how did she get him to do what she wanted? She ended up I don't think she faked sick. I think she kind of got sick about it.
Right.
And
Well, how did she get sick? What did she stop doing?
Eating.
She stopped eating.
And so it was just kind of a persuasion tactic. But
Yeah.
it worked.
Right,
So
yeah.
He respected his mom.
Mhm.
Eat, I will stop.
Right, yeah.
As a dude.
And the key thing is if something had happened to his mom, Chinese people would blame him. It's his fault. If you were a better son, your mother would have eaten. Right? It's your fault. Right? So that's kind of the idea. And I think this went to what Madison was kind of saying earlier, right? She tattoos him, basically. Says, you're going to remember this. Right? So, and I'll contrast this later, but even though you ideally, remember, a woman's supposed to follow her first son, in practice, it doesn't always work that way, right? You still have to do what his mom said. Okay, Tyler is wanting the side up, so.
I can't judge how heavy it is. I don't know if it's going to make it to you. I'm going to try.
Very good. Okay, Tyler. So why did Sui Meng befriend Chao Sung Ge Ko, sorry, P on you. How would Chow help him later on? I'm butchering your lovely language, and I'm sorry.
Well, did a monk come to him
Yeah.
and said that this boy will restore your life if he's condemned to death?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of magical, right? Lots of these stories, they're not just strict Confucian. They also have magical elements, right? Yeah, excellent. And so and so he befriends him, and how is Chow going to help Sang Mu later on?
Well, he was about to be condemned to death, but
Right.
instead he told him you can go to prison and that he should be treated well. That he was
Yep.
exiled as a soldier in Yunnan.
Right. And they took care of him, right? He couldn't just let him go, right? But he used his connection subtly to let him out, right? Guanxi, right? Or in Korean, Guange, right? Connections are everything. And so he kind of breaks the rules, fudging him a little bit to get him out. Right? And that's how power works in traditional China, in modern China, and many other countries too. Right? Very important. Okay, Tyler, throw it. You just toss it. It's just whoever gets it. Remember, if you don't know the answer, you can just throw it to someone else. People are so polite. Okay, Brandon. Right. What happened to Li Shun? And how did Sui Meng get vengeance for him?
So Li Shen was approached by a gentry
Right.
who was very interested in his wife.
Yep.
And he basically went gambling with him one night, and he got into a lot of debt, and had a lot of insurance on, or not insurance, but basically he racked up a lot of debt, and he
Yep.
was unable to pay it off, and he basically had to give his wife to the gentry.
Yeah. Yeah. Women, property, it's kind of weird, right? Yeah. But yeah, he has to give his wife. Yeah.
And then Sui Meng heard of this, and he went to, I don't remember what he tried to, I think he went to the gentry's house, and he killed both the gentry and his wife.
That's a little bit shocking, isn't it? Right? Like, I get killing the member of the gentry, but he kills his wife. Right? That's kind of shocking. And there's a detail you may have missed, right? His wife wasn't. Oh, Dylan, you want to?
I've got an idea about
Right.
that. The wife, from what it seemed, she was willingly going along. She was forced to. But
Right.
in Chinese culture, if let's say the man forced himself on her and
Right.
all that, then it would have still been seen as the woman's shame.
Right. Yeah.
So in order to not bring her dishonor, he just probably in his mind just killed her for the better
Right. Yeah.
in a twisted way.
Right. Ideally, you should. A woman should defend herself in that. She should stay loyal to her husband. And if she was forced against her will, the logical thing to do would be to kill herself, right? To show that she did not desire this, and that would wipe away her shame. She was naked when he came in there, which meant she was going along happily with everything. So that's why she was killed, right? So again, we see this is kind of unfair, right? I mean, Li Shun's not the best husband in the world, right? I don't think he can be really self-righteous about this. But again, this is still a very patriarchal civilization at this point, right? This is important for when we talk about modern Chinese feminism later. We have to understand they had Chinese women have a lot to complain about. And of course, how does Brendan, you give side up a toss. You just throw it randomly. I say if you don't know the answer, it's all right. You just throw it to someone else. See, what's funny? No one ever wants to throw it. No one ever wants to do it. And then I just want to point out what's really funny is that
Everyone always thinks about you.
when I use side up in class, people are like they don't respond like I hope they will. They don't seem that excited. But then in my degree evaluations or my evaluations, people are like, why didn't we have more side up? In any case, all right. Can you tell us, Aaron? Right? How did Sui Meng's wife react to this when he wanted to turn himself into the government? Right? He said, "I'm going to turn myself in."
I don't remember.
Right? Okay. She just said, "Don't do it."
Okay.
Did he then turn himself into the government? Yeah. You listen to your mom before your wife. Right? The mother has more power than a wife in traditional Chinese society. Right? She had to do what he said. Now, if you don't remember this, you can throw it back. But why did both Li and Sui claim to have committed the murder? Right? It was interesting. You had two people confess to the same crime. Okay, next time don't give it to someone who already answered.
Well, Sui, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this name, I'm so sorry.
I'm not getting any better. See, I should point out this is in the old system of romanization called Wade Giles that we don't use anymore. We use Pinyin now. and I don't know how to read Wei Zhao's. I know how to read, if it's pinyin, I could do okay, but don't worry about it.
I know that he did not want Lee to take the fall because he felt guilty about it, and then
Yeah, because he did it.
yeah,
Yeah, he actually
and
did kill the
and
guy.
then Lee was like, you know, I'm guilty because I wanted to do it, even though
Yeah. He did what I wanted to do, and I wasn't brave enough. So they both claim it's really a neat story, right? It gives us also Chinese ideas of friendship, right, along with these ideas of vengeance, right? So I want to skip down a little bit. This is all exciting stuff. It's very interesting, but it doesn't say as much about what there's some things I want to highlight more. So how does it end, right? Tyler, can you throw it at someone? Anyone? Jesse.
Oh.
Oh, there was a list.
No.
Okay, excellent. All right.
How long?
Goodness, guys.
I'm saying,
It's
so who ordered that
like
monster?
this is a-
Jesse, you can either answer the question or throw it.
I'll do it.
Okay, Gemma.
Okay. Are we still on?
We're on how does the story of Li Shun and Sui Meng end, and what is the significance of it ending on that terms?
Okay. So I'm not sure if I got it right, but I said it ended by Li and Sui getting famous and like
Right.
forming a local defense force.
Yeah.
And it was like it was significant because since China was so big, like the government couldn't offer like local protection,
Right.
so they were the local protection.
Yeah, it goes to the fact that the Chinese government is broad, but it often has trouble going deep, right? Has trouble taking care of these people, and they have to take care of it themselves. And notice that means they get to use violence themselves, right? One definition of a state is whatever holds the monopoly on violence. They farm that out in this case. All right. So going now to the other story. This isn't the fiction story. This is the actual story. Gemma, can you throw it at someone, please? Jesse. Okay, it wasn't a throw. Why was Wang Sun and his family angry at Li Tongchun, and what did they do? This is the actual story. This is fact. The other was fiction.
It's
It's okay. If you don't know it, just throw it to someone. Yeah, go ahead.
They were mad because like they called his family some sort of, I can't remember what they called
Yeah, he's
it,
like-
but they
He insulted them.
basically called him trash.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like your family is just armed thugs.
Yeah.
And so how did they respond to being accused of being armed thugs?
They killed.
Yeah, they killed the family. It was true. They were armed thugs. But you don't say that publicly. Right? It's rude. And also it challenges, their position in society. It makes them lose face. So they responded by engaging in armed thuggery and killing the whole as much of the family as they could. Right? Okay, give it a toss. Someone else? No, and this side of the room has not gotten it. All right. Cameron, you want to, okay. Mark. Okay, that's fine. Can you? Right. So, why was it difficult, right, for Magistrate Huang Lu Hung to determine who was even suspected of attacking, of attacking the Li family, and how did he eventually find out?
Because he had some friends in because the Wang has many friends in his town.
Yeah, the Wang family was very well connected, and everyone was scared of them. Right? Everyone was scared of them. No one wanted to accuse them of anything. And the Wangs were pretty brazen. I love that. They didn't want to accuse the Wangs, so they accused someone else, thinking that would force the Wangs to testify. And the Wangs just came in and said, "Yeah, this guy's innocent. I'll be his. I committed the murder, but I'm not going to tell you that. It's fine. You release him into my custody. It's hilarious, right? But why? This is very important. Only one person was really willing to help, right? Quan Mingyu. Okay. Tianyu, can you throw it at someone, please, for our. Just toss back. Yeah, everyone trying to hide. Oh.
Good.
Okay, either answer or pass. Do you know the answer, Markel? Okay, give it a pass. Show it to someone else. Right, do the readings. Cameron. Okay. Do you remember why is Quan Mingyu willing to help? Why is he like the one guy that's going to help out? Well, this is the best part of the story.
God.
I really keep getting all these characters.
I understand. There's lots of different characters. Okay, let me give you a clue. Mary, he is an elder brother. Does that help you? Okay, Jesse was volunteering. Jesse, you can. Okay, give it a shot. Defend the drink well. Okay.
Because Wei's son had killed his younger brother.
Yeah, the one guy who wasn't scared, who was willing to help out, he wanted vengeance. This guy killed my younger brother. Right? This guy killed my younger brother. I want him dead. We'll pick up with the rest on Friday. Yeah, on Friday. I'll see you all then. I said these are exciting readings. Make sure you do them. Lots of murder and
Fell in love with the guy. He saw her ankles, and then she had to get taken away.
I like the fact you remembered was that she saw the I don't know if that's in the original story, but it is in the movie. It is in the movie. She was recklessly revealing her ankles on the swing.
Yep.
Dr. Brown.
Yes.
Oh, in like the last ending of the real story, it says the some other county, and it says it's by a guy named